Hey everyone, greetings. It's Naomi Wolf of Daily Clout and on Substack of Outspoken. And as promised, I'm here to read to you my latest essay, which is generating a lot of commentary about why aggressive ICE protesters are closer to being the actual fascists than they realize. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. And it's called Dear Beloved Elder, Please Stop. Subtitle is Your Support for the Anti-ICE Protest Movement Will Destroy Us. And in brackets, it says, the following is a letter I wrote in response to a conversation with a beloved relative. End brackets. Dear beloved elder relative, this is a letter to urge you to rethink what you are doing in supporting the protests against ICE's law enforcement activities and to ask you please actually to stop. You and your friends at times lend your support to the anti-ICE protests in your adorable little town. And you know I support First Amendment protected expression whenever citizens wish to express themselves. But there are larger implications here, beloved elder. I love you. I respect you. I appreciate very much that you let me think about your responses to news events and even let me describe them publicly at times when I need a model of what a thoughtful liberal person who lives in a deep blue state and watches CNN and listens to NPR believes. I appreciate that you, unlike most of the folks in your tribe, are always open to the evidence I share, even when it is contrary to these narratives. I appreciate that you consider my evidence open-mindedly, even when we do not agree at first, and even when we continue to disagree. At times, you join your friends at the local anti-ICE protests, which take place in the city hall of your tiny, comfortable town in your beautiful Western state. You and your friends are showing up as you see it for your neighbors, and you are putting your bodies on the line, which sensibility carries a pleasing echo of the advance guard of the civil rights movement of the early 1960s, which happened in your living memory. This interpretation of what you are doing, no doubt, feels good, as there are indeed too few roles for our elders to play in our society that tap their latent heroism and sense of devotedness to others. You all also feel, I gather, that you are, quote, engaging in radical compassion, end quote, a phrase I've just started hearing from multiple sources, and one that worries me for its neo-Marxist and implicitly extremist implications. And you are sure that you are all aligning with one another on the right side of history. You also reasonably, in some ways, are concerned that ICE agents have no badges and that they cover their faces. I know that you and your protesting friends who are of your generation or of a generation younger, wearing North Face or REI jackets and Ecuadorian-inspired or actually indigenous-made mittens and headbands against the cold, greeting one another with happy smiles in the forbidding weather, uplifted by the energy of altruism, mean very well. I know you see this as a simple David and Goliath conflict with you all in the role of David. But I think that that interpretation of events is deceptive. I also must note that your fellow anti-ICE protesters, like anti-ICE protesters across the country, are overwhelmingly white. You and your protesting friends are overwhelmingly, though not exclusively, upper middle class or even wealthy. ICE agents are often barely middle class. The starting salary for an ICE agent is as low as $33,400, and that they average $32 an hour. I must also note that 49.3% of them are not white. The second most represented ethnic groups of ICE agents is Hispanic, and then African American. More than 15% of ICE agents are disabled. Nonetheless, you and your friends truly do believe that ICE is a lawless militia sent by someone whom you also truly believe is a quasi-dictator. Your news outlets and social media feeds communicate to you that ICE is attacking people who are here having committed an, quote, administrative offense, who are, quote, our neighbors, who, quote, just want to work in our country. I understand that you feel sure that in, quote, standing up against ICE operating in your community, you are standing up against incipient or actual fascism. I applaud your civic energy, even as I think it is sorely misguided in this situation. And now I'm going to share the screen. I can't share the screen because I'm on Safari, so I will just keep reading. You and your friends also believe that the protesters in Minnesota are simply peacefully using their First Amendment protected rights to have their say, and that the deaths of the late anti-ICE activists, poet Renee Good and VA nurse Alex Preddy, who both were shot to death in conflicts with ICE agents in Minnesota, are examples of the mayhem being wreaked by a lawless violence of a band of thugs. When Alex Preddy was killed, you and I spoke about it by phone. Our disagreement was too painful, so we stopped our phone conversation and signed off. You felt that Alex Preddy was murdered in cold blood. I texted you, quote, Alex Preddy had a weapon with a loaded magazine. Then I sent you this, a CNN article and video appearing to show that a federal officer took a gun from Preddy just before the shooting that killed Preddy. I texted, if you don't plan to use a weapon, you don't load it. Very dangerous situation. You replied via text, it was holstered. He was shot. The NRA spoke out against this. I texted back, quote, I don't doubt it, but beloved elder, bringing a loaded weapon to a protest is a very dangerous thing to do. Anyone aware of a loaded gun, holstered or not, will assume it's a shooter situation. I should have texted may assume. Frustrated by the fact that the media to which you listen often misrepresent original quotes, I tracked down what the NRA had actually said. I texted you then, quote, in a separate social media post, and this is a quote from an article, the NRA said, quote, as there is with any officer-involved shooting, there will be a robust and comprehensive investigation that takes place to determine if the use of force is justified. As we await these facts and gain a clearer understanding, we urge the political voices to lower the temperature to ensure their constituents and law enforcement officers stay safe, end quote. And then this is me again. The NRA is saying that there should be a full investigation and that everyone should lower the temperature. That is not the same as condemning the shooting. Beloved elder, I texted further, I wish you and your friends would consider what it is like to live in a society without the rule of law. It's a catastrophe, but especially for women, children, and the elderly. You have to see how difficult and dangerous it's being made for ICE to do their jobs enforcing US law, which again, if you don't like the law, change it. But for now, the law says that people here illegally must be detained and deported, as is the case in almost all other countries, end quote. You replied by text, he had a license, he didn't do anything to be shot 10 times and murdered. You also texted, he was murdered trying to protect a woman. They fired 10 shots into him and murdered him. He did not deserve that, end quote. I see from your point of view how black and white you see the situation to be, but please consider that you may be wrong. I have rarely brought up an issue as serious and impactful in regards to our shared future in this country as the one I am broaching. Beloved relative, I want you to understand that ICE is not a lawless militia. This is a really important point for you and your friends and half the nation to take on board. ICE agents are not making up their own rules as they go along or flouting the laws of our nation. I've written about lawless militias and their dangers ever since my book, The End of America, was published in 2007. I know a lot about thugs and lawless state-sanctioned violence, about its nuances and its history. Fascist dictator Benito Mussolini took over Italy, at that time a fragile democracy, by sending groups of black shirts, thugs who obeyed no laws, who were acting externally to the existing laws of Italy. The black shirts surrounded voting booths and intimidated voters, often using violence. They strategically attacked key leaders of Italian civil society. newspaper editors, national political opposition leaders, local mayors. They beat them severely. They killed, tortured, and threatened numberless members of Italian civil society. Their goal was to intimidate those, the judiciary, the parliamentarians, even the local police who might otherwise bring them to justice. This tactic worked so well and so quickly that when Mussolini marched on Rome in 1922, he was able to take over power because parliamentarians were looking at his massed band of thugs and knew that they were already defeated. The existing government resigned, and King Victor Emmanuel III simply handed over power. Thousands of black shirts with Benito Mussolini marched on Rome in October 1922. Shockingly to me, as the granddaughter, there is a worldwide rush for gold right now and precious metals. China is buying gold. There are rumors that the Federal Reserve will be using gold to pay off federal debt, or the federal government will be using gold to pay off federal debt. Famous investors are buying gold. And there's a movement away from the dollar worldwide. And you can see that there are warning signs in the economy that appeared before the Great Depression in 2008 that are flashing red right now. So in all this instability, it is a very good idea to protect your savings, to protect your IRA by diversifying into precious metals, especially gold. There are a lot of gold companies out there. Not all of them are kosher. Not all of them are responsible businesses. American Alternative Assets really is. And we're very, very proud to have them as a sponsor. We're very picky about our sponsors, and we only accept sponsors who have products that we either use or invest in ourselves. So I really encourage you to go to cloutgold.com, CLOUTGOLD.com, and get a free report explaining to you what the risks are of not diversifying into gold and silver. And I just want to know that when Brian and I started talking about investing in gold 5 years ago, when it first became clear that you could do that easily, if we'd put in $1,000 then, it would be 5,000 now. If we'd put in 10,000 then, it would be 50,000 now, and so on. So obviously you can't predict everything about the future, but gold there's a limited amount of it on the planet. And in a time when you can have your assets switched off, if they're digital, like the truckers in Canada had their bank account switched off. People in Spain are having their bank account switched off. All of China is now on a social credit system. Your assets can be switched off. And Europe is pushing for central bank digital currency. Now is the time to diversify into gold. Of a man and a woman who lost 9 siblings along with their young families to actual extrajudicial Nazi violence and murder, commentators such as the Late Show host Stephen Colbert and others are now referring to ICE as being worse than Nazis. Nazis, at least, Colbert said, were willing to show their faces. And I've got an image of Stephen Colbert receiving an Emmy, smiling, surrounded by celebrities. And my note there is Stephen Colbert, who took on verbally people who are worse than Nazis. Like Mussolini's black shirts, upon which they were modeled, the SS and the SA, Hitler's informal thug caste, which were unleashed onto German cities before Hitler seized power in 1933, wielded their violence outside of existing German laws. The Nazi paramilitary disregarded German law in its rise to power. Quote, the Nazi Party's paramilitary organization were the Sturmabteilung, more commonly known as the SA. The SA were formed in 1921 and were known as brown shirts due to their brown uniform. Initially, most members were ex-soldiers or unemployed men, violent and often disorderly. The SA were primarily responsible for the protection of leading Nazis and disrupting other political opponents' meetings, although they often had a free rein on their activities. The SA and the SS became symbols of terror. The Nazi Party used these two forces to terrify their opposition into subordination, slowly eliminate them entirely, or scare people into supporting them, end quote. Remember that when the brown shirts started seizing and beating people in makeshift basement detention centers, Germany was still a fragile democracy. It still had a parliament and a set of laws, including guarantees of due process and prohibitions against excessive state violence. The lawlessness deployed by the SA in those pre-1933 years was the reason that they, like the black shirts before them, were so effective and terrifying. The existing laws of Germany did not restrain them, and as in Italy, judges, civil society leaders, and local police were too frightened by SA violence to enforce the existing laws. The brown shirts, quote, arrested, really seized citizens, communists, newspaper editors and owners, businessmen, opposition leaders, Jews, random Germans, whom neighbors singled out as being not sufficiently supportive of National Socialism. Quote, by engaging in violence, the Nazis increased their visibility, especially in large cities like Berlin, where it was easy for a speaker to get lost in the crowd. Then, since police presence was inevitable, the forces of order became a protective force around the SA during their marches. Finally, quote, seemingly audacious acts of provocation were able to occur precisely because there was little risk of them growing out of hand and, quote, elated those who participated in them and thereby attracted new followers, end quote. And this is all one long quote. One can only marvel at the sheer genius of Nazi political activity. Quote, when Hitler finally rose to power, the street violence changed and became an adjunct of state power, and brown shirts set up their own illegal prisons, 240 where torture was carried out, and 11 early concentration camps where they acted with impunity. Quote, the centralized locations of many of these provisional prisons and torture chambers made the early SA terror a highly visible and at times audible element of Nazi rule, end quote. Excuse me. If SA violence during the run-up to power was a harbinger of what would transpire when the party achieved power, SA actions when that finally occurred set the tone for the following 12 years, end quote. And now this is me again. An account in the Garden of the in the Garden of the Beasts, Love, Terror, and an American Family in Hitler's Berlin by historian Eric Larson captures the day-to-day life of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's U.S. ambassador to Germany in 1933 and 1934, Professor William E. Dodd. Professor Dodd noted that when an American citizen was seized by the SA, he was beaten so badly that he could not leave his bed for days. When he finally made it to the U.S. Embassy, his body was a mass of bloody pulp. By the time that Hitler engineered his full seizure of power after a questionable arson attack on the Reichstag, the nation had already been traumatized and tenderized by the completely lawless violence of the SA. ICE, in contrast, dear beloved elder, is part of a federal agency that is bound by a multitude of laws. The agency and its agents are also bound by the Constitution. ICE is governed by almost 400 federal statutes. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is ICE is primarily governed by federal immigration statutes, the U.S. Constitution, and Department of Homeland Security policies. DHS policy limits the use of force. Quote, general statement, unless further restricted by DHS component policy, DHS LEOs, law enforcement officers, are permitted to use force to control subjects in the course of their official duties as authorized by law and in defense of themselves and others. In doing so, a LEO shall use only the force that is objectively reasonable in light of the facts and circumstances confronting him or her at the time the force is applied. End quote. In other words, the DHS policy that outlines the permitted use of force in defense of themselves and others dates from 2018. It is a President Joe Biden policy, beloved elder. Agents must also abide by the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fourth Amendment ensures that ICE agents must have a reasonable suspicion before detaining anyone. It also prevents their entry into non-consenting homes without a judicial warrant. Let's remember what the Fourth Amendment actually says. It does not say that no law enforcement can ever enter your home. Rather, quote, The right of the people to be secure in their persons, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. That end quote. That is exactly what DHS guidelines spell out. Agents need, quote, probable cause or a, quote, reasonable suspicion and a warrant in order to enter a non-consenting home. Your standing between the ICE agents in your town and such homes is not, in fact, providing a bulwark against fascism. It is actually creating an obstruction to the provisions of the Fourth Amendment. Key laws and regulations that govern ICE and limit their activities include laws that have been on the books for decades, such as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. This gives the legal foundation for immigration enforcement and includes oversight of identifying, detaining, and removing illegal aliens. Federal Statute Title 18 was enacted in 1948. It authorizes law enforcement to prevent the illegal movement of both people and goods. That governs ICE. Federal Statute Title 8, enacted in 1952, applies to immigration, refugees, naturalization, and to removing people who are here illegally. The laws that govern ICE have been the law of our land for decades. President Trump did not invent the legal underpinnings for what ICE is doing in 2026. The Congresses of the 1940s and 1950s, in your infancy and childhood, did, beloved elder. If ICE agents break any laws, there is recourse. ICE frequently uses administrative warrants, Form 1-200, that require, quote, specific articulable facts to justify detention in order to enter homes. Targets of ICE arrests have the right to refuse a search of their persons and belongings if the agents have no probable cause to search them. And importantly, as noted above, ICE may not use excessive force. ICE must follow the same, quote, objective reasonableness standard of using force as do local police. So, ICE is not the Gestapo. The legally restricted conditions in which ICE operates are the opposite of the Gestapo's lawless work conditions. ICE's actions are all subject to legal review, and they must adhere to federal statutes, the Constitution, and DHS policies. I see that some people are very upset that sometimes American citizens have been mistakenly detained by ICE. This kind of error on the ground is inevitable. I feel that people are incredibly naive about what it means practically to seek to detain, process, and deport even 1,000 people in a dense city, let alone 1 million people who are here illegally, let alone 17 to 30 million, many of whom are from contexts of extreme violence already. By definition, beloved elder, this is an operation that takes on, as careful as ICE agents may be, the risk of errors inherent in conducting a mass operation of law enforcement against people who are by definition not compliant with federal laws to start with. This mass operation is taking place in conditions of extreme stress and danger and on an immense scale. Parentheses. If people don't want to risk a potentially rough or emotionally upsetting encounter with an arrest by ICE, they can just go home. DHS gives them a free plane ticket and $2,600 per person from your tax dollars in order to do so. A family of four will have a year's income in many countries by taking up this offer. End parentheses. Even if ICE were not surrounded frequently and, as in Minnesota, perilously to them and others with screaming, provocative, and physically intimidating observers, protesters, such mistakes will be made. But guess what? If you are falsely arrested by local law enforcement or ICE or anyone in a policing role in the United States, you eventually get released. Ah, there goes my earring. I have been arrested twice in my life for protest, as you know. The first time in about 1985 or 1986, I was a young Rhodes Scholar. I was in London with a group of Rhodes Scholars and other Oxford University students. We were protesting outside the US Embassy against then President Ronald Reagan's policies in El Salvador. I was eventually handcuffed by a bored, quote, Bobby, British police officer, who commented silly season, meaning that it was summertime when protests were more frequent. He put me in a holding cell for several hours till I was released, with no further action taken against me. The rule of law protected me then. It had been weakened in Britain since. It has been weakened in Britain since, and I would not wish to be at the mercy of the British justice system today. But my own peaceful and compliant actions also protected me and ensured that my protest and arrest would not escalate into violence. In 2011, I was arrested again outside a Huffington Post gala to which I had been invited. I was arrested for explaining to Occupy Wall Street protesters that so long as they did not impede pedestrian traffic, they had the legal right to protest peacefully on the sidewalk outside the gala. I told the protesters their rights. I did not tell them to do things that they had no legal right to do. I did not instruct the Occupy Wall Street protesters to obstruct the pavement or the movement of NYPD. I knew local New York City law, and their obstruction of NYPD would not have been legal. I did not encourage the Occupy Wall Street protesters to form barricades preventing NYPD vans from proceeding in traffic, thus endangering not just NYPD but nearby residents by keeping ambulances and fire trucks from reaching them. I did not instruct the Occupy protesters to confront unrelated pedestrians outside of the gala to demand their papers or to block their entrances to the gala. I did not urge the protesters to make pedestrians swear that they are not members of this or that group, as protesters are doing in Minnesota in demanding that passing cars and pedestrians swear that they are not ICE. I did not do any of that, and I would never have done any of that because none of those actions are First Amendment protected speech or actions, and all of them violate local and federal laws. Those are, in fact, very violent, very threatening, very insurrectionary, non-1A protected actions. And the fact that protesters are committing those actions does not make them 1A protected or even moral, beloved elder. You can see how illegally the NYPD behaved in the videos of my 2011 New York City arrest. This second arrest was a much scarier experience than the first arrest had been. I was put handcuffed into a windowless van that took me to a separate precinct, far from the eyes of legal observers. I was held in a blood and feces smeared cell for a number of hours and then released with a trial date. If I had been convicted, I would have been sent on to the violent prison, Rikers Island. But the charges were eventually dropped. The system worked. What also worked within this constitutional system was the fact that I understood my own responsibilities as a protester. I did not break the law, either before my arrest, during it, or after it. Though I knew I was being unlawfully and unconstitutionally arrested, and though I tried calmly to cite to the police chief arresting me the New York City law that allowed protest on the pavement if it did not obstruct pedestrians, I submitted to arrest without any resistance, and that's in italics. You can see that in the video. It wasn't because I was too scared to resist arrest, though I was indeed scared. It was not because I was not passionate about the issue, free expression that had led to the confrontation in the first place. I submitted peacefully to an unlawful arrest because I respect the Constitution and the rule of law. I knew that the place to fight an unlawful arrest was in the court system and not physically, not screaming, writhing, or kicking on the sidewalk, or provoking what could be an enraged mob to threaten NYPD. I didn't shout obscenities. I did not go limp and force NYPD to handle me bodily. I did not spit or struggle. By the way, thinking about this, I'll never forget that the crowd of protesters around me, who were very much on my side, were looking to me and my partner at the time for how we would react. And I have no doubt that if I had, you know, resisted, fought, screamed, fallen to the ground to force them to lift me bodily, there would have been an enraged mob for sure. And greatly, it would have escalated the danger of that situation to everyone. And I didn't do that. Just as NYPD had 1A obligations as law enforcement, I had 1A obligations as a protester. So do all the protesters protesting ICE today. Just as ICE must obey the law, so must the F-ICE contingents. In all cases, this is a moral as well as a legal obligation. This is the First Amendment. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. End quote. The First Amendment, dear elder, is not a hall pass to impede law enforcement in their federally legislated activities, to block their ingress or egress to law enforcement operations, to stalk or harass pedestrians or drivers, to disturb the peace of residents of a city, to resist arrest, or to threaten the safe functioning of emergency services transit within a town or city. None of that activity is identified as protected speech above in the Constitution. We have no right under that beautiful amendment to harass law enforcement or to torture them with drums, whistles, and screaming, all of which are tried and true methods to break down the mental health of prisoners, as we saw in the torture files of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo. We have no 1A right to drive our vehicles toward law enforcement in any way, to use our vehicles to block traffic or to harass pedestrians. There is a great deal of case law and federal law showing that one has the right, for instance, to hold up signs or to speak to people outside an abortion clinic, but not to harass or block or intimidate staff or patients seeking to enter that clinic. Who pressed for such laws? You and your friends did. This was your side, beloved elder, which supported limits on the protest of right to life protesters. The FACE Act of 1994 forbids blocking entrances. Who signed the FACE Act? President Bill Clinton did. Quote, after its enactment by Congress, President Bill Clinton signed the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act into law. Fines for violent offenders for their first offense can be as high as $100,000, with prison sentences of 1 year. Repeat violent offenders can receive up to 3 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000. If the protest resulted in an injury to clinic staff or a patient, the prison sentence can go as high as 10 years. Quote, in the case of first-time convictions of protesters who engage in nonviolent physical obstruction, such as sit-ins or blockades, the law allows judges to impose fines of up to $10,000 and 6-month prison terms. Second convictions for these kinds of offenses are punishable by up to 18 months in jail and fines of up to $25,000. The individual harmed by the protest activities may also sue the protesters for civil damages. Quote, Congress adopted the freedom of access to clinic entrances in reaction to the increasing number of blockades of abortion clinics by anti-abortion groups and the inability or unwillingness of local law enforcement officials to protect the clinics from intimidation and violence. The italics are mine. Quote, the law was introduced in Congress after the Supreme Court ruled in Bray versus Alexandria Women's Health Clinic, 1993, that federal court judges were not permitted to invoke a Reconstruction-era civil rights law, the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, against the harassment and protest activities that frequently occurred outside abortion clinic entrances. The KKK Act prohibited conspiracies by persons seeking to deprive, quote, any persons or class of persons of equal rights, end quote. That's the history of the FACE Act, okay? You guys wanted it for good reason, because people were being harassed and obstructed in seeking abortions. Women were. Beloved elder, the laws against violent protests, the reaction from ICE to violent protests, to which you so object, are laws that your side passed under your President Clinton to stop pro-lifers from being so threatening, obstructionist, or intimidating that women's rights were curtailed. ICE is enforcing your laws. It is up to protesters to know about local and federal law regarding protest and to abide by the First Amendment. It's up to protesters peacefully to submit to arrest if they choose to protest in a way that legally allows arrest. And it is up to protesters to be aware that attacking the vehicles of law enforcement, as Alex Pretty did, is not a First Amendment protected speech act, nor is creating noise levels that harm the functioning of human beings, nor is impeding law enforcement operations in any way. 1A does not cover threatening law enforcement or anyone or communicating a threat of violence. Now, let's talk about what it means to break the law and what it means to pick and choose the laws that you enforce. It leads us as a nation of citizens to cross a barrier from which there is no returning. You may think that people here illegally are just, quote, committing a misdemeanor. It is a federal misdemeanor, punishable by up to 6 months in prison, note, and that therefore you believe that their illegal presence in our country is not a big deal, and that sending in men with guns and masked faces is a massive overreaction. I would say that you are completely wrong. First of all of the illegal immigrants have broken our laws simply by being here, as I showed above. Does the rule of law matter to you at all, dear elder? Between 17 and 30 million people simply disregarded our laws in order to be present in our nation. What does it mean when you simply accept a situation in which people can pick and choose what laws they observe? History shows that you soon have a collapsed society. Second, millions of people being here illegally is a massive national security threat. Jan C. Ting argues in Immigration and National Security that, quote, the greatest threat to U.S. homeland security comes from illegals who enter the country through its porous borders in order to attack. The tide of illegal immigration must be stemmed in order to secure the United States against terrorism, end quote. Third, many of these people here illegally are actually criminals. I used to think that that was a racist statement, but statistically, it's true. And hundreds of thousands engage in criminal behavior here. There are at least, I couldn't believe this number, but it's a real number, 662,566 convicted criminals or illegal aliens with pending criminal charges in the United States, and it links to a government site. That is nearly the size of the population of San Francisco when I was growing up. Fourth, those here illegally are taking resources away from low-income Americans and especially from Black and Brown Americans. In your comfortable neighborhoods, you do not see the damage. You may see a worried gardener, a concerned nanny, but in the neighborhoods where the illegal gardener or nanny may live, it is the American kids whose classes can't proceed because too few children in them speak English. It is lower income Americans who face hours-long waits in emergency rooms for themselves in pain or for their own children because of the pressure on our medical resources of people who are here illegally. It is lower income Black and Brown Americans who are expressing their frustration that the entry-level jobs that their own young adult sons and daughters used to have are no longer open to those young Americans. It is lower income Black and Brown people, as in Brooklyn, whose kids' James Madison was appropriated to house people here illegally. How is this situation okay with you? Where is your and your friends' quote radical empathy for low-income American communities, the communities of color that you all used to champion so reliably? Fifth, and most importantly, is this: there are certain unintended consequences of you and your friends choosing what U.S. laws you will block and frustrate. Please consider the long-term consequences of the F-ICE movement. This movement reminds me a lot of how insultingly Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home from that war, a war supported by Congress and by presidents. Ask the same question that U.S. military veterans asked themselves then. Why should anyone fight your wars again? Now ask, why should anyone in the future fight your future wars against crime, against natural disasters, against terrorists? No one who is not the wife or child or parent of a soldier, a sailor, a cop, a firefighter, or an ICE agent can imagine what life is like for their loved ones day to day. ICE agents, like cops, throw themselves every single day into situations in which they do not know if they will survive to see their kids and wives or husbands again. ICE agents break into houses inhabited by violent cartel members. Like soldiers in combat situations, they face situations that could erupt at any moment into gunfire or in an explosion. ICE agents don't know from one day to the next if they will be injured or killed on the job. Beloved elder, 111 police officers died in the course of doing their jobs in just 1 year, 2025. Now add to the incredibly hazardous conditions for ICE agents doing their own jobs a mass of mostly white people of all ages who are trying to make the situation even more dangerous, who are screaming into their ears or cursing at them or driving at them or blocking their egress or kicking out their taillights, as the armed Alex Preddy had done to an ICE vehicle 11 days prior to his death. In addition to the risk from the target, him or herself, ICE agents are seeking to accomplish their lawful mission in an incredibly dangerous and exhausting and emotionally draining field of operations. Soldiers in comparable conditions reliably get PTSD. ICE agents may also face mental health breakdowns from these conditions, but whether that kind of damage is done to them over time or not, what they are seeing right now is Americans, many of them who are much more privileged than they are themselves, treating them with abusiveness and contempt. Beloved elder, really think about this, what this will mean going forward. Finally, there is this. Cops and firefighters and veterans and soldiers are watching carefully how ICE agents are being treated. Unsurprisingly, 200 police officers a week are quitting or resigning in Zohran Mamdani's New York, where Governor Hochul just declared her own non-compliance with ICE operations. Beloved elder, when someone breaks into your home, you will call the cops. Do you expect them to answer? Why should ICE enforce immigration laws over time if this is how they are treated by citizens? Why should soldiers enlist to fight your wars? Why should firefighters run into your burning building? You should expect that as first responders, cops and soldiers see how ICE is being treated. They will resign or fail to reenlist or simply go through the motions when called to put themselves in harm's way. Why should you assume that police or law enforcement will ever show up for real for you and your friends if this is how you treat their colleagues? Seriously, you want to act out against ICE to endanger them, to traumatize them on the job, and to burn them out? But when you are mugged or burglarized, God forbid, you will call their colleagues and expect to be protected? Please do not be so naive. Law enforcement will just turn away from citizens and absent themselves from their now selfless civic duty. Why shouldn't they? Look at how you are treating law enforcement. Beloved elder, I have traveled in countries where the cops have given up. You still see them around. They still wear their uniforms and carry their weapons. But when a crime is underway, they inevitably don't see it happen. They turn away, knowing that there is no reason to put themselves in harm's way, no mutual social contract with citizens or with political leaders. They align with whatever warlord or real tyrant is in power. Beloved elder, when that happens, there goes the rule of law. Militias and gangs move in. People fear going outside. As in Haiti, people can't take full-time jobs because they have to wait outside the school's gates to walk their children home at 3 o'clock. Lawlessness, real lawlessness, takes over the streets. And who always, always suffers most, as I have said before, women and children, the disabled and the elderly. The ones who suffer most in a society without the rule of law, beloved elder, are people such as you and your friends. Lastly, please think about what it means when states refuse to comply with federal laws. Think of our US history. Do you really want states to pick and choose what federal laws they obey? Our system of state and federal balance and alignment was very carefully refined from the start of our nation and over time. When this mutual agreement fails, we get tragedies such as the Civil War. Leading up to the start of the Civil War and starting with South Carolina's effort to nullify a federal tariff in 1828, some states did what Minnesota and New York now threaten to do. They acted as if they knew better what to do for their constituents than to accept federal law. Southern states in 1860 and 1861 argued that the federal government had broken the contract between the states and the Union by failing to enforce the Fugitive Slaves Act. These states seceded as a result, asserting their sovereignty. As in Minnesota today, many locals in the seceding states were aligned with their state's resistance to federal authority and saw the local states' agendas in a positive light. However, was this popularity of local resistance against federal authority worth it long term? The nation fell apart into a bloody civil war. Between 600,000 and 750,000 people died. Do you want this risk? Do you want the rule of law that holds the 50 United States together as one nation, state law interacting with federal in an orderly legal process, to fly apart again? Think about Alabama in 1963. Governor Wallace used Alabama's National Guard to block African American students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. He imposed a bigoted state preference over a federal judge's ruling that the university had to be desegregated. President John F. Kennedy had to federalize the Alabama National Guard to ensure that African American students could enroll in the university. Now, it is an anti-ICE states' rights movement. beloved elder, with which you happen to agree. But what if tomorrow it is a state declaration of Sharia law in Oregon or Texas or California? Or what if it is an order by Alabama or South Carolina to resegregate the races? Do you really want to destroy the delicate, even miraculous, respectful, and legally orderly relationship in the United States between state and federal laws? If you don't like immigration laws that ICE is enforcing, change them. Seriously, you still live in a democracy. Elect people who will pass different laws. You can. But once the citizens and even states just decide what laws they will disobey, you no longer have a nation of laws, and you will have no choice about your leadership or your society at all. So I hope the above has given you pause. I respect you, I do, but this movement of which you are a part is unconstitutional madness, and that way lies the end of our nation as one of laws and not of men and women. Beloved elder, please, I beg you, reconsider. For all of our sakes and for America's, you have my heart. Please also take and consider my evidence. All my love, Naomi. That is the end of this essay. And someone asks, did she record this earlier? And the answer is no, I'm recording it live. I'm broadcasting it live. Many comments, so many comments. I wish that I could share them. Autumn Smith says, yes, this is exactly how veterans were treated when they returned from Vietnam. Thank you. Little abuse, get off the air, user. I don't know what that means. And Autumn Smith points out, not to mention all the military-aged men from over 100 different countries who are not exactly friendly to the United States who came here illegally. I do believe it's an army, or there's an army buried in there. And if you're looking at what's happening in Britain, you can see that an army is emerging in a two-tier justice system. Let's see. Lots of abuse. You're disgraceful. You know, it's my experience that when I offer a really good argument with a lot of evidence, people on the left or who are supporting the position I'm criticizing, because I think of myself as a liberal to this day, don't argue back with counterfacts. They just engage in verbal abuse. Let's see. This is why I should receive illegals being released from custody, dialogued conversation. I'm not sure what you mean, Daniel, but you are a good friend, so I'm sure there's thoughtfulness behind that, and I should understand it better if you want to amplify. Rosa 632 says, very well spoken. Thank you. Thank you. Vonda Grubb says, thank you for your voice. Thank you. Lots of nice comments. Saf 62 says, great talk. Your number 600,000 aligns with Trump's current deportation numbers. That's very, very interesting. That would, I mean, that's very interesting. What is this, beloved elder? It's a letter that I wrote to a relative of mine. I didn't want to name her, but she consented to let me address her in this way publicly. Oh, don't forget housing costs. I pay now more for a one-bedroom apartment than my old farmhouse barn 10-acre mortgage back over a decade ago. After rent and minimal utilities, I have 200 to live. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. That's crazy. I am concerned about your grocery costs, which you didn't mention. But I mean, half of Americans now live paycheck to paycheck or on credit card debt. And many people are pointing out, you know, these resources. I mean, in New York, we're $12 billion in the hole, according to our new mayor and our old mayor. We don't have the money for our own kids and our own elders and our own infrastructure and plowing the streets of snow, let alone for millions of people who are not Americans and who are not here legally. It is madness. Many people have pointed out that everything, housing, cars, transportation, becomes more expensive with this pressure of illegal immigrants, and that as they leave, in fact, costs, or as they're deporting or self-deporting, costs are dropping. I mean, not to where they should be, but there is housing is such a good example of it because, of course, if you've got 30 million extra people in the United States, there's more demand for housing. It's going to be more expensive. Those are basic market forces. Guys, I love you. I've got to go to a meeting. Thank you. Remember to support me by subscribing. If you think this is a valuable essay, it takes a lot to write essays and research them like this. I don't just make this stuff up. That's why it's impactful. And I have a team that helps me get this out to you. So, and I'm much shadow banned to this day. So please do become a paid subscriber on my Substack Outspoken if you possibly can. It's $7 a month. And if you can't, God bless you. Please share my work if you care about it. And over on Daily Clout, you can subscribe for $3.99 a month, or you can make a one-time donation. Love you so much. I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.